Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pynakker, and this is a very special episode, but not in a good way, because unfortunately, war has broken out in the nation of Israel. I have a couple guests here that I'm looking forward to having this conversation with. Many of you probably know Jason Olson, author of The Burning Book. We had him on about a month ago, and a lot of people have really enjoyed that interview. Jason is a Jew who is a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who is also serves in the capacity of lieutenant colonel. Is that correct? In the U.S.
Lieutenant
Navy.
Commander, yeah.
Lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy. You did, and then we have the man himself, Dr. Nehemia Gordon, my new friend. Who him and I yesterday did a live report from Israel on his channel, his YouTube channel called Nehemia's Wall, or the anglicized pronunciation, Nehemiah's Wall. And that was thousands of people watched that episode, and it definitely is resonating with people. And for whatever reason, this evangelical Christian who has this Mormon-themed YouTube channel, which is basically an interfaith channel, and what we're trying to do is model how we can have respectful interfaith dialogue on my channel. But then there's also times like this in which we need to be united in our support of Israel, whether we come from a Latter-day Saint background, whether we come from an evangelical background, whether we are secular. Even, folks, just so you know, even in my atheist phase, which was for about a dozen years, I was supportive of Israel, okay? So we know there's very good secular people who also support Israel. We also know that the world condemns this action, just like they condemned the actions in Ukraine. Just saw today that on the Brandenburg Gate in Germany, they put the Star of David shown on the Brandenburg Gate in Germany.
Wow.
So there's a solidarity there for the Jewish people. This is not a political thing anymore. Whether you're critical of the state of Israel, that's fine. It's a democracy, and you're critical of certain things they do, that's fine. I am too. But this is beyond the pale, of course, what happened. Hamas has invaded the nation of Israel. This is the first time in over 50 years that it's 50 years to the day of the Yom Kippur War. Right after the Feast of Tabernacles, on Shabbat, these monsters have done terrible, brutal, unspeakable things to the Jewish people. And this is just the second day of this conflict. And we in America, our prayers go. I know I just came from a church service where people were waving the Israeli flag, and people were supportive of Israel. We just finished up the Feast of Tabernacles here at my Christian community, and so, folks, we all those of you who are all civilized humanity supports the nation of Israel in this hour. Nehemia, my friend, thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, what Hamas did is so heinous that it was condemned by the government of Saudi Arabia. Just like put that in perspective for a minute. There's videos that Hamas is putting out of mutilated Israeli bodies of women. They have 85-year-old woman that they are parading through the streets who they kidnapped. And, in some ways, this is worse than what the Nazis did. In some ways, obviously, in other ways not. The Nazis, they actually had a policy that you were not allowed to tell people outside the network of those who were involved in the killing. They were not allowed to publicly talk about it. They were not allowed to video it. They were not allowed to photograph it. We have very few videos and photographs, and everyone we have, as far as I know, was taken against the rules that the Nazis had put in place, because they didn't want their own population to know about it. They thought if our population knows the atrocities that we're committing, they won't stand for it. Hamas is bragging about it. Hamas is the one putting out these videos. I mean, they're the ones putting up the videos of the mutilated body of the 20-something-year-old girl who, I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's evil. It really is evil. What really breaks my heart, and we talked about this yesterday, Stephen, is that Israel has to respond to this, and a lot of Arabs are going to die because of that response. We have no choice. We have to go in and root out this evil from Gaza, and civilians die in war. And I'm confident that that is what Hamas wanted. They want there to be dead Palestinian children so that they can show that to the world and turn the world against Israel. But we don't have a choice. They invaded our country. They've kidnapped. I mean, right now we're on. It's Sunday, around 6 p.m. in Israel, and the death toll has exceeded 600. Now we spoke yesterday, and I predicted that it'll get to 500. It's exceeded 600, and we're not done. There's over 2,000 wounded, many of them fighting for their lives, and who will end up dying.
And to give perspective here,
Yeah.
it would be like in America if we had September 11, but it was 30,000 dead. Okay, that's the proportion is huge. 600 would be like 30,000 people dying here in the United States. So
I mean, it really is a mind-boggling number. It's mind-boggling what happened. There are believed to be somewhere possibly 100 people or more who have been taken as captives to Gaza, who are being held as I mean, they've been kidnapped. Some of them may be tortured. There was a video I just saw of one of the terrorists came into this home in a place called Nir Oz, which is on the Israeli side near the border of Gaza, and they took the woman's phone and they ordered her at gunpoint to start a Facebook Live so they could brag and show to the world what they were doing on her phone, on her channel. I mean, it's really incredible what's happening here.
It sickens me. It sickens me. Now, Nehemia is in Israel. Where are you located? Are you located in Jerusalem, my friend?
I'm in Jerusalem in a neighborhood called Baka, which is, if anybody knows Jerusalem, is in the southern part of the city near the German colony, between the German colony and Tel Piot.
Okay.
And look, yesterday I had to go several times to the bomb shelter. We had, I don't remember exactly the number, but 7 or 8 air raid sirens. We didn't go to the shelter at first because I didn't realize how serious it was till I started hearing the explosions overhead. We had 3 rockets that were intercepted directly over our heads.
Wow.
We could see that it leaves like this little puff of smoke when the interceptor from the Iron Dome hits it. And there was 1, and then later there was 2 more. And I'm like, oh wow, that couldn't be. I guess the only way it could be closer is if it actually fell on us, right? So I ended up going into the bomb shelter for the first time ever in this particular apartment. Last time I had to go to a bomb shelter, I might have gone once in Sderot, actually, now that I think about it. Maybe about 5 or 10 years ago. But the last time I had to like seriously go into a bomb shelter was in the first Gulf War in 1990 when Saddam Hussein was firing Scud missiles on Israel. And then I was never actually in the area where the missiles exploded. And my wife asked me yesterday, because this is only her second time to Israel. She said, "Have you ever seen anything like this?" And I said, "Only on TV."
Yeah, you're living it, and you're giving us what's going on right now. And Jason, I just want to welcome you onto the program. Now, Jason, you lived in Israel for a time. As a matter of fact, you even flirted with the idea of joining the IDF. You are very, very attached to the Jewish people in more ways than one, both personal and religious and philosophical and political. It's all encompassing. And that's why you reached out to me almost immediately saying, I want to do something with you guys. And so I want to thank you for coming on the program and maybe just kind of give us some of your feedback.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Nehemia. Just to preface, I'm only speaking for myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of the United States, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So just speaking for myself to make that clear. But yes, as your viewers know, I'm very connected to my Jewish identity. I'm very connected to the land of Israel. I'm very connected to the Jewish people, and I stand with Israel, and I stand with the Jewish people in this time of war. As an American, as a Latter-day Saint, as someone who who believes and supports Zionism as a project that is beneficial to the Jewish people and is true to their identity and the Jewish people's indigenous roots in the land of Israel. I do believe that, through the forces of history, Jews and Arabs have both made homes in the land of Israel. And that's okay. There's a fascinating debate in the 1980s between Rabbi Meir Kahane and Rabbi Yitz Greenberg. It's a really fascinating debate that one could look up on YouTube. And I absolutely come on Rabbi Yitz Greenberg's point of view, where he talks about how Arabs, Muslims, Palestinians, they've made a home in the land of Israel. And he talks about how they're monotheists. They worship the God of Abraham, and that they're also created in the image of God, and they are images of God, and so they deserve to be treated fairly and as human beings in the land of Israel. And that's kind of the position that Rabbi Yitz Greenberg took. Rabbi Meir Kahane was more of an extremist, and some of that is, those views are still being reflected in Israel of expulsion of Arabs and Palestinians from all of the land of Israel. I do not support that position, which is kind of the Kahane position. However, that said, there needs to be peace and security in the land of Israel, and the source of the violence and the insecurity is Hamas. And so I stand resolutely against Hamas as a moral position, even as a religious position. Hamas's desire to destroy the Jewish state, Hamas's desire to terrorize the Jewish people living in their ancestral homeland, which I believe is a covenant between God and the Jewish people, is evil. It's satanic to drive the Jewish people from their homeland, the land that God promised them. It's resistance to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's intentions. So that's my position, and what I'm seeing now. That's what Hamas is doing. It's so fascinating because in the May 2021 war, Hamas had the same intent. They just didn't have the planning or the training or the capability to invade Israel at that time. And but there was so much condemnation of Israel in May 2021, just a couple years ago, and Hamas was, more contained within the Gaza Strip. Now they're doing what they more of what they want to do, and by maiming and kidnapping and murdering, torturing the Jewish people. But the world's reaction is different. The kind of the one of the sicknesses, in the world and in anti-Semitism is that people are more supportive of the Jewish people when the Jewish people are victims. And so that I think we are seeing more support, which I know Jews appreciate, as you mentioned, even in Germany. But it's really tragic and sad at the same time that Jews have to be victims in order to garner some support from some corners of the world. And so I'm personally so grateful for Christians of all stripes, including many Latter-day Saints that stand with the Jewish people and stand with Israel as a moral issue, as a religious issue, and it is not a political issue. The gathering of the Jewish people and their return to their ancestral homeland, it's moral and it's religious. We're not talking about any Israeli political party here. So I make that line very firm in the sand. And even to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that it is a religious and moral imperative to stand with Israel and the Jewish people at this time, that they can resolve this war, to end this war, restore peace. And I think that restoring peace is going to require the destruction of Hamas, as my personal opinion.
Mm. And speaking of which, Nehemia, I've been hearing reports that Hezbollah has been lobbing missiles over the northern border. Is there any-
Well, they've been doing the, yeah, not on full scale, let's put it that way.
Okay.
They've definitely fired some things at us. I think some mortars, and we responded with artillery, and there might have been some, maybe there were rockets, I don't know. But it so far they've haven't opened up a full scale front against us. And hopefully they won't. I hope and pray they won't. I hope they stay out of it. The difference between Hamas and Hezbollah is Hezbollah takes their orders directly from Tehran, from Iran, and Hamas is supported by Iran. That's a big difference. I know a lot of people are trying to blame Iran for this. Hamas may have gotten support to do this from Iran, but they don't. Look, you made the statement that they didn't have the capability before. I don't know. There's going to be investigations when this whole thing is over. I've seen a lot of situations over the years where I'll just give you an example. There were there was kind of some upheaval and about things going on in the Temple Mount, and it was Ramadan, and there was 100,000 Muslims up on the Temple Mount, and there were reports that their intention was to storm down from the Temple Mount into the Jewish quarter and kill every last Jew there. And it seems like that was their intention, but Israel put an overwhelming amount of force between those people who wanted to do that and the people they wanted to kill, and nothing happened, right? There's been many incidents where you'll see they're storming the border fence and Israel has to open fire, and the international narrative is Israel is shooting protesters. No, they're shooting people who are coming to slaughter Jews. That's what they're doing. That's what their intention is. They say that's their intention. So they've stopped it in the past, and the question is why this wasn't stopped. That will be worked out by investigations after this war. I don't have the expertise to even speak about that, but that's a question people in Israel are asking. And to put this in perspective, we're 36 hours in. As we're recording this, we'll put it out a little bit later, but we're recording this. It's 6:25 p.m. here in Israel. The war began at 6:31 a.m. yesterday. So it's almost to the minute 36 hours in, and there are still bands of Hamas terrorists in Israel that haven't been rooted out yet. They're still trying to clear the southern part of Israel. And really before we respond, and maybe we go into Gaza. Maybe, I don't know what we do, right? I'm not being consulted, that's for sure. By the military or the government. But whatever we end up doing, we have to first, secure our own borders before we can go and pursue the enemy. We don't know at this point what the final death toll is. Like I said, we've exceeded 600. It looks like it's going to get to 1,000. Could be more. We don't know how many people have been kidnapped. There's one woman who was called on her daughter's cell phone by a terrorist in Gaza who said, "We have your daughter. We are going to rape her and kill her." It was from her daughter's cell phone. Her daughter is missing. Is her daughter still alive? We don't know. Maybe she's already been raped and killed. We don't know. You talked about the religious aspect and the moral aspect of this. And I did posted something yesterday on TikTok, and I have all these people coming on saying, you deserve it. The Jews deserve it. You've stolen Palestinian land and you deserve it. And I mean, and they'll. I think this is a desecration of the name of Allah and of the teachings of Muhammad. And I'm not an expert in either of those, but from what I've read, it's a desecration of the name of Allah and the teachings of Muhammad to support this kind of attack on innocent women, children, men. I mean, like the 85-year-old woman who's been taken captive. That how do they justify that from their religion? I don't understand. It really is sickening. And
Yeah.
that they're doing this in the name of Allah. You know, what we're constantly hearing on these videos that they're putting out is Allahu Akbar. Allah is the greatest. Well, like I said, I'm not an expert in Islam, and I do appreciate the government of Saudi Arabia condemning this. I think that's the proper thing for them to do, and I hope other Muslims come out and condemn this evil.
Amen to that. You know, and this is the thing. I do agree with that. I think this is a type of Islam gone toxic, and we have a history of this within Christianity. Our hands are covered with blood too, historically, as a people. But we also know that as we have advanced past that within Christianity, and of course we were talking off camera how in Vatican II there were reforms made. Deicide is no longer taught by the Catholic Church, and you actually had mentioned how a Jewish convert to Catholicism actually played a role in influencing that as well. But also, let's also say that this probably isn't what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would have had in mind for his people. Jason, one thing I want to say to you, ask you, is that because you're in the military, you kind of contrasted what they did 2 years ago to what you see now. It seems to me like this was a high level, well planned out military exercise that would have had some kind of outside support, some kind of coordination with other groups because to do what they did, this was a land, air, and sea attack, coordinated. What do you, as a military person, to describe how you see it?
Yeah, that you're hitting right on it. Some of the news reports that I've seen stated that Hamas was doing training and exercises, simulating what they've actually done. Unfortunately, you know, the Israel Defense Forces, which are our partner, they are our partner, and we stand with them. They may not have taken these training and exercises that Hamas was doing within the Gaza Strip as seriously as they should have. Not thinking that they would actually execute them. But that's the thing, is when our enemies are conducting training and exercises and they're simulating military operations, that we have to assume that they're going to do it when the time is right. So that's the reports, right? You don't do military training and exercises unless you intend to, at some point along a strategic environment, to execute those operations. And so that's very unfortunate that there wasn't enough IDF presence near the border with Gaza to repel this invasion. And that's, you know, but nevertheless, we can't blame the Jewish people of the state of Israel. This is squarely the responsibility of Hamas. But their intentions is something that we already know. Their intentions is to destroy the state of Israel if they can, and they increasingly, between Hamas, Hezbollah, some of their partners in Syria and Iran, you know, there is an existential threat to the state of Israel, right? So it's not insignificant. People want to portray Gaza and Hamas as this weak, embattled mini state. They are blockaded for a reason, right? And I know, as Nehemia said, you know, Egypt is also blockading Gaza and Hamas as well, because they're an enemy
frankly,
to this
they're
Egyptian
more,
state.
yeah, they're more of an existential threat, to, at least to the regime in Egypt, than they are to the regime in Israel. You know, they conquered a few villages and have cost, you know, a lot of deaths, but I don't see how they could come in and hold territory in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, whereas they could, through their bosses in Cairo, in the Muslim Brotherhood, they could easily overthrow the government. Well, I mean, at one point they did take over Egypt not that long ago.
Yeah.
And they were then ousted by the military.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, somebody posted in the comments of one of my videos that, you know, well, Gaza is this open air prison camp. Well, no, it's not. It's a state.
It's a state.
It's absolutely a de jure state. It's as much a state as Somaliland and Transnistria. It has a military. It doesn't have its own currency, but lots of countries don't have their own currency. There are plenty of nation states in the Caribbean, for example. Micronesia is another example, which, you know, use other people's currency. But it is a state, and it doesn't have recognition in the United Nations, and it doesn't have an air force, because we won't allow them to have an air force, because when they just have jeeps, look what they do. So
Yeah.
yes, and we prevent them from bringing in you know, military equipment, because they would bring in tanks and airplanes and they would overrun our country. So absolutely, we have a arms blockade around Gaza, but as you said and I said, so does Egypt, right? They have another boundary. And yeah, so you know, this idea that is I said this yesterday to Stephen, you know, in Al Jazeera, the spokesman of Hamas was asked, how did you plan all this when Israel controls every inch of Gaza? And he had like some prevarication, some, like, you know, he didn't really answer the question. The answer is, we don't control Gaza.
Right.
And look, maybe that's the problem. Maybe we need to reconquer Gaza and have a permanent military presence in there. We don't want that. There's 2 million people who live in Gaza. We don't want to rule them. We want them to be free and independent. And, you know, people have been posting free Palestine, and I agree with that. Free Palestine from Hamas. They have this dictatorship that was elected in, what was it, 2005, I think they were elected.
Yeah.
And there's never been another election since. They massacred all the leaders of the PLO, of Fatah, once they took over. You know, that's their rival that rules the West Bank. You know, the Palestinian rival group, and they won't allow other elections because they're Islamist militant dictatorship.
They also are a nihilistic death cult. I mean, that's what you're dealing with here. I mean,
Yeah.
you're not dealing. This is barbarism. This is not Islam. This is not. This is a nihilistic death cult of a level of evil that's almost incomprehensible. And these monsters have controlled Gaza for this period of time. And the people of Gaza are also victims of this evil organization. Okay. And this is what's so sad, is a lot of Jewish people have died. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of Arabs that are going to be dying.
A lot of Arabs, a lot of Muslims are going to die. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's very sad to me. Look, you said it's not Islam. I don't think I'm willing to say that. You know, you talk in your program, Stephen, how you don't decide who's a Mormon.
Well, that's true.
Right? You've got what's the guy, Warren Jeffs, who claims to be the true representative of the continuation of Joseph Smith Jr.
Yep.
I think what I could say is, I hope this doesn't represent, and I think it doesn't represent the true message of Islam and Allah. But to say it's not Islam, it's a form of Islam.
Fair enough.
And from my perspective, and I think the perspective of a lot of Muslims, it's a perverted form of Islam.
Yep.
But, you know, I don't decide who's a Muslim, just like I don't decide who's a Christian. I don't
Fair
decide
enough.
who's
Thank
a
you for the
LDS.
correction.
Well,
and also, let's also
yeah.
point out that, as bad as this is, they were elected by the people of Gaza as well. So
Yeah,
we also
they
have
were.
to acknowledge that reality too.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of support they have in Gaza, I don't know.
Yeah.
We wouldn't know because they don't have freedom of speech there.
Yeah, I have to just point out, and Nehemia mentioned it earlier, right? The propaganda that Hamas is putting out, right, is hey, we're just reclaiming our stolen land. So let me push back on that. Okay, on Hamas's information warfare. Okay, the Jewish people have not stolen any land. Jewish people are indigenous to that land. And if listeners want to look it up, right, there's what's called the four holy cities of Judaism: Jerusalem, Tiberias, Hebron, and Sfat.
Gaza. No, Sfat and
Sfat.
Gaza. So
Oh,
Tiberias.
maybe that's
is one-
maybe in another tradition.
No, so
but
Tiberias isn't one of the four holy cities. It's actually Gaza. And what that refers to is when Jews would come to Israel in the Middle Ages, when they would return home, they would go to one of those four cities. Those were the four centers of Jewish learning. You know, the Jewish Messiah was proclaimed in the year, I want to say it was 1665 or 1666 in Gaza. Now, what do I mean, the Jewish Messiah? Well, he turned out to be a false Messiah, but they didn't know that at the time. There was this man named Shabtai Tzvi, who in 1648 had proclaimed himself to be the Messiah. And everybody thought he was just kind of like a weird guy, kind of a nut, kind of, you know, a Meshuggah, a crazy person. And then he arrives in Gaza, where one of the leading rabbis of the generation was called Nathan of Gaza.
Nathan of Gaza. Yeah.
Nathan of Gaza. He was also called Natan HaNavi, Nathan the prophet, because he was a Kabbalistic, they believed, prophet, right? I don't believe he was a prophet, but people did at the time.
Right.
And he met Shabtai Tzvi in Gaza, and he immediately said, God showed me in a dream that you're the Messiah. And then it wasn't Shabtai Tzvi who convinced the Jewish world that he was the Messiah. It was Nathan. So Gaza is a city that has long Jewish roots. But you know what? We've compromised on that. There are no serious Jewish groups in Israel today who say, you know, you mentioned Kahana. When I was a teenager, I was a supporter of Kahana, because it's a real teenage thing to do, is to say, oh yeah, we've got enemies, let's just wipe them all out. And then I grew up and realized, okay, you know, you got to get along with people, whether you like, you get along with people you don't like. It's called coexistence.
Yeah.
And there's no serious Jewish group today who says we should conquer Gaza, drive the Arabs out, and settle it. No one says that.
Yeah.
There's no one who seriously says today that we should conquer Gaza with 2 million Arabs and rule those 2 million Arabs. Nobody has, up until now, up until yesterday, no one in any serious organization in Israel even fathomed that. They were talking earlier, I was watching the Israeli news channels, and they had people who had been involved in meetings in the cabinet in the past, and they said no one's ever discussed even reconquering Gaza as part of a temporary operation, because we're like, okay, you know, Gaza is Gaza. It's a separate country. We don't invade other countries, right? We'll live in with coexistence, and they fire rockets at us from time to time, and we're developing countermeasures to stop that. And occasionally we have to send in small forces to root out, you know, terror cells, right? But we have no desire to hold Gaza and even to reconquer it. Well, that may change now. It may, and they want it to change. They absolutely want to draw us into a war. That's clear. I mean, you don't have to be a great military genius to figure that out. Just like Al-Qaeda wanted to draw the United States into Afghanistan. You know, was it a mistake for the U.S. to go into Afghanistan or not? That's not for me to say. I'm not a military expert, you know, and, you know, hindsight's always 20/20, right? But look, we haven't had another 9/11 in the United States for over 20 years. And maybe that is because we were engaging the enemy on their turf and instead of letting them come to us. Maybe that's what Israel has to do with Gaza. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a military expert.
I would just say there's historical precedent, and I have to compare Hamas's behavior to the Nazis. Okay. Now, what's the difference? Hamas is weaker than the Nazis. That's it. How much difference in ideology is there, really?
In 1923, Hitler was weak, right?
Yeah.
When he carried out the beer hall putsch, he didn't have any power, but later he came to power.
just a matter of strength. So, but even after the United States and the Soviet Union at the time defeated Nazi Germany, right? We had to occupy Germany, right? We had to occupy Germany and carry out a policy called denazification to rid the German people and the German state of Nazism and the Nazi Party. Okay, and that required occupation, and we had forces there, U.S. forces, and they did this work to make sure that the Nazi Party would not rise again and do the disgusting, evil things that it did. So, just in my own personal opinion, I think probably a de-Hamasification is needed, right? I mean, there's a lot of different military options to bring that about, but it's clear that Hamas is there is no even coexistence, let alone any kind of lasting peace with Hamas. Even Ismail Haniyeh, their leader, made a statement that he's going for the 1948 borders. He's going for the destruction of the state of Israel. That he stated that's his policy goal, and now he's doing military operations to achieve his policy goal. So it's easy, if it's simpler just to perceive that, just like in World War II, we're not at war with the German people, we're at war with the Nazi Party. And
Hitler was elected too, by the way, right? I mean,
sure,
he was elected, then they couldn't get rid of him. Very similar to Hamas.
Yep, one election, right?
Yeah.
All we need is one election. That's what Hitler did. That's what Hamas did, and that's what we're facing. So I just trying to make some clarity for viewers.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. We're dealing with true evil here. There's this woman who's they're showing this on their media channels, the Hamas. There's this woman, probably in her late 30s, early 40s, who's holding her two little daughters in the streets in Gaza and being paraded as a war trophy, and is now probably in some tunnel somewhere being held as a captive, a civilian. I mean, her two little daughters are terrorists. I mean, what military objective could be explained by kidnapping a woman and her two daughters, an 85-year-old woman and hundreds of other people? There's no
right. The intention is to terrorize the Jewish people, so that they're terrorized to the point that they will leave the land of Israel. Right. I mean, that is the point of it, and that Hamas can reacquire the territory that they believe is religiously and historically theirs.
I think it's more nefarious than that. I hate to say.
Okay, sure.
I honestly think their objective is to create such terror that Israel goes in to Gaza, and in war, as you know, because you're in a military, people die, civilians die. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think in the U.S. invasion of Iraq, I read one statistic that it was, I'm not going to give a statistic. It was a mind-boggling number of civilians who died. Well, that's what happens in war. War is horrible. We hate war. We want peace. And if Israel has to go into Gaza, many civilians will die. Well, we have to go in now. There's no choice. I don't think anybody is seriously thinking we're not going to go into Gaza, which was their intention. I think they want enough Arab children dead that Saudi Arabia decides we're not going to normalize relations with Israel, that Lebanon decides we're not going to normalize relations with Israel, that other Arab countries and Muslim countries decide not to normalize relations with Israel. I think that's actually their objective. If they had their way, sure, they would kill every last Jew in Israel. And, look, the famous thing is they would point to the sea and say, we're going to drive them into the sea. They point to the Mediterranean and they wanted to drown us and drive us into the sea.
Yeah.
Do they have that ability now? No, they don't. But they hope maybe one day they're going to get that. And they certainly want to draw Hezbollah into this and Iran into this. Syria is in no position to be involved in this, I suppose, because they don't even control their own country. but they would definitely love to see those other parties involved in this. And Hezbollah has something like 200,000 rockets. They could flatten many cities. They could flatten Haifa, which is a city of hundreds of thousands of people. Half of them are Arab, by the way, but they don't care.
Yeah.
If you look at, I looked earlier today at the list of, they've started to release the list of the names of the people who were killed. And many of them are Arabs, surprisingly. You would think, oh, well, they killed all these Jews. No, they've killed a lot of Muslims. How did they kill those Muslims? Well, I mean, they're indiscriminately firing rockets. Some of those are going to land on Muslims. To quote Jesus, when it rains in the good and the bad, right? When it rains rockets, it could hit,
Yeah.
Jews, it could hit Muslims. So there have been a bunch of Muslims who have died in these rockets. And I'm sure Hamas is looking at that and saying, well, they're martyrs. They're in heaven now with Allah, so it's okay that we killed them. But they don't care about killing Muslims any more than I'm sure they prefer to kill Jews, but these are people who kill Muslims too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Nehemia, you're making a great point about the Abraham Accords, the process of normalization.
Yeah.
I've been studying that a lot lately, and the thing is there are these signs even in Saudi Arabia. You look at statements from NBS, right? Yes, the Palestinians are Arabs, right? But the Houthis are also Arabs, right? We are beyond the historical period of Naserian pan-Arabism, right? Each Arab state, and this is just me speaking as an academic for myself, but each Arab state is looking after their own national interests. And that is what has led to the normalization with Israel. And I think we're going to see some very interesting things happen that will test the strength of the Abraham Accords, which I think are real. And the Saudis are not, from what I can see, Saudis are not looking at the Palestinians as, hey, these are just my fellow Arabs. When we're talking about Hamas, I think the Saudis are saying this is a proxy of Iran, and there is a parity between Hamas and the Houthis. The Houthis are firing rockets on Saudi Arabia, on the United Arab Emirates, and they're sponsored and funded and armed by Iran, and so that's drove the normalization with Israel. So what I'm hoping to see, I can't predict it, but I can push it, is I'm hoping to see that Israel's Arab friends and partners in the region will see this for what it is. This is not a war between Israel and the Palestinian people. This is a war between Israel and Hamas, a proxy of Iran, who is also an enemy of these Arab partners of Israel. So, and this is just the realist view. Destroying Hamas is in the best interests of the Saudis, of the Emiratis, of the Bahrainis, of the Moroccans, of the Egyptians, of the Jordanians.
Well, definitely
Hamas poses a threat to all of them.
And Iran poses really an existential threat to at least the ruling family of Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
Saudi Arabia is ruled by a family which has several thousand members. And beyond that, they have a population of millions of people. I believe 15% of whom are Shiites. And it is the goal of the Iranians to incite those Shiites and arm them to overthrow the regime in Saudi Arabia. And so that's a real threat. Those people will be killed. Every member of the royal family will be killed if they can't escape, if they are overthrown by the Shiite minority in Iran. And so, yeah, I understand why it's in their interest. What I would, I'm thinking out loud here, but just as you're saying this, I'm imagining, Israel goes in and wipes out Hamas. That would be the ideal scenario. We don't want to stay there. So what you need is some kind of peacekeeping force.
Yes, I was thinking the same thing.
I would like to see a Saudi peacekeeping force.
Yep.
With participation of the Emiratis and other Arabs who want peace. I don't think that would be such a bad thing. I think that would be good. I went to Singapore a few years ago, And it struck me how similar Singapore is to Gaza. Singapore is one of the densest population centers in the world, like as far as people per square mile. It's much denser than Gaza, right? There's this myth that CNN says it's, the densest place in the world of population. There's an open air prison. That's a lie. Monaco is the densest population in the world, and Monaco also has more millionaires per capita than any other place in the world. Singapore is very dense. It has 4 different population groups, and they have an official policy that we get along. We may like each other, we may not agree with each other's culture. We don't like the habits of the other group, how they eat and what they eat, but we get along. And you have to. You're in a small country, you have to get along. And Singapore is a really rich country because they're able to get along, and they're a hub. Gaza could be that hub.
Yeah,
You could
port city.
It could easily be an international port where everything coming from the east passes through Gaza, through maybe pipelines that come through a lot, right? Or through Saudi Arabia and other building pipelines. That could be Gaza. Gaza could be one of the richest countries in the world if they just decided they wanted to live in peace.
Yeah.
And instead, they're putting all their ingenuity, all their creativity into death and destruction. It's a shame. And look, and Singapore has Muslims. Muslims know how to live in peace.
They do. And Israel is not afraid of living next to a prosperous, peaceful neighbor. Israel made peace with the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah,
extremely wealthy.
Over
extremely wealthy.
Over 1 million Arabs have visited the United Arab Emirates since the peace accords were signed.
Just 1 million Israelis?
Over 1 million Israelis have visited the UAE since the peace accords were signed. The Abraham
1 million.
1 million. Just think about that. I don't know that 1 million Israelis in the last 2 or 3 years have visited Cyprus or Italy, but
Gaza could become like the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
And Israel is not threatened by that at all. Israel is not threatened.
No, we would love that.
At all.
What are you talking about? We would absolutely love that. We would love to live in peace with them. We have in Israel over 1 million Muslim citizens. Israel has 2 official languages, Hebrew and Arabic. So by law, every sign, every government document has to be written in Hebrew and Arabic, because we have Arab citizens. Some are Christian, but the majority of the Arabic-speaking civilians or citizens are Muslim, and many of them serve in the Israeli army. Proudly, they serve in the Israeli army. And you ask them, why would you serve in the army? People ask them, why do you serve in the army of this evil Zionist entity? And they say, what do you mean? In this country, I can say whatever I want. I can vote for a political party that I want. If I go across the river to Jordan, I can't do that. If I go to Syria, I can't do that. In Syria, I've got people, the government, throwing what they call barrel bombs. I don't know if you know about that. It's a barrel literally full of explosive they throw into civilian populations just to kill them. In Israel, okay, what are our issues that we have in Israel? It's not a perfect society. Israel has all kinds of problems in Israeli society, just like any society. But under the law, before the law, if you stand before the Supreme Court of Israel, which includes an Arab as one of the members of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's got problems, that's beyond this conversation, but you are equal under the law. And that's why you have Muslims and Christian Arabs who join the Israeli army and defend their country. And Hamas hates that. Hamas wants a purely monolithic ethno-state of just Arabs, and not just Arabs, of Islamist. And by the way, I didn't say Islamic, I said Islamist. Islamism is a specific type of Islam, of hybrid between Islam and politics. It's a politicization of Islam. That's what Hamas is about, openly, right? They don't deny that.
So I wanted to talk about, first of all, within the evangelical world here, I live in a Christian community, and if you drive up into the entrance, you'll see 3 flags: the United States flag, Canadian flag, and the Star of David. The service I went to film in front of the church service here at the building. They call it the Tabernacle, and there was a woman coming from her car carrying an Israeli flag, because they fly banners and flags in the worship service. Historically, the evangelical community in America, in particular, has been great friends and allies of the Jewish people and of the state of Israel. This goes back for decades. Even we can trace its roots even into the 19th century. And speaking of the 19th century, we also have this unique history with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormons. And Jason, you are a convert to that faith, but I think it's really important. You know, Nehemia, we were talking about how there was this gentleman named Orson Hyde, who was sent by Joseph Smith to go to the nation of Israel and to dedicate the land for the return of the...
he was sent to the land of Israel. It was Turkish occupied Israel at the time.
Turkish occupied Israel. So it wasn't. There was
no nation of Israel. There was no nation of Palestine.
He went to Eretz Yisrael. Is where he went.
He went to the land of Israel, not the state of Israel.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. Yes, this
was 400-year really Turkish occupation.
We get this right, exactly.
Yep.
But so Orson,
and Orson Hyde found Jews there. Okay.
Well, he came in 1841. Do you know by 1863 they did a census of the population of Jerusalem, and a majority of the city of Jerusalem was Jewish in 1863. Now I don't know what it was. 1841. I don't know if we have a census.
It was a minority. Yeah, I have Orson Hyde's journals, and I think he says there was about 7,000 Jews living in Jerusalem. But so this idea of stolen land, ridiculous.
Yeah.
Or even Orson Hyde found Jews already living there.
Yeah.
And we can talk about what he prayed for, though, right?
Yeah,
I want to talk about. Hey guys, wait a second. I'm going to turn the air conditioning on here because it's kind of hot.
Okay. So while we're doing that, we'll have Jason describe what was Orson Hyde doing in Israel, or the
land of Israel, right?
Yeah.
No, it was Israel. He was in Israel. Sorry, I split hairs about that.
Oh no,
yes.
it's important.
No, you need to. It's there.
How did Orson Hyde end up in Israel, and what was he doing in Jerusalem?
Yeah, so I did.
And maybe before that, because a lot of my listeners and viewers are going to say, who's Orson Hyde?
Yeah.
So can you give us that background?
Yeah, so I have published a chapter in my mentor, Jonathan Sarna's Feischrift about this very topic in New Perspectives on American Jewish History, if you want to look up the book, as far as a Mormon book review, if you want to promote that book. So Orson Hyde was one of the first 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, of the Restoration in the latter days. And he was very close to Joseph Smith. He was chosen by Joseph Smith, and in our tradition, we believe, by the Lord. And early on, Orson Hyde had dreams, visions, that he was going to go to the land of Israel, that he was going to go to Jerusalem for a marvelous work and a wonder. And that day came in 1841. He went with originally was supposed to go with a companion named John Page, but John Page kind of wasn't able to complete the trip. He was set apart by the prophet Joseph Smith to go on this mission to Jerusalem, to dedicate the land for the return of the Jewish people, for all the Jewish people. Because there were already Jews there, but they were a minority. So let's throw in a definition. What is Zionism? Zionism is making a Jewish minority living in the land of Israel into a Jewish majority. That's all Zionism is. It's not a big deal. But Orson Hyde and the prophet Joseph Smith wanted to pray and for this Jewish minority to grow and to become a majority and to have a country, have a state. Orson Hyde, and I wrote about this, he wrote letters to prominent Jewish Orthodox rabbis throughout Europe. There wasn't really much Reformed Judaism back then in 1841. And he wrote Rabbi Solomon Herschel, who was the chief rabbi of Great Britain at the time. Right? And people know, through those who know Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks is, a 21st century, 20th and 21st century inheritor of this title. But Solomon Herschel was the chief rabbi at the time. We have letters that Orson Hyde wrote to this rabbi, talking about Zionism and the return of the Jewish people to their land and inviting them to participate. In Orson Hyde's letter, so here's what's significant is that it's talking about, number one, the return of the Jewish people, even those Jews who are living in Europe. There's also Hamas propaganda out there about the Khazar theory and that Ashkenazi Jews are not real Jews. Well, I'm telling you,
the 13th Tribe book written in the 1970s.
Yep. I'm telling you right now that it is Latter-day Saint doctrine that is false, because Orson Hyde and the prophet Joseph Smith were writing Ashkenazi Jewish rabbis living in Europe, inviting them to return to the land of Israel.
Wow.
So Rabbi Solomon Herschel is one of those kind of Jews that the prophet Joseph Smith wanted to return to Israel. He never did, but that's the intention, right? So, and Orson Hyde's visiting all these European cities, trying to be a Theodore Herzl and convince these rabbis it's time to go home, right? Ashkenazi Jewish rabbis. Okay, so and
Let
also
me jump in for a second.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
So as far as the definition of Zion, my definition of Zionism is the right of Jews to live in their native homeland, whether we're a majority or not a majority.
Sure.
To me, I don't need Jews to be a majority. It'd be nice if we're a majority, but I don't need Jews to. Herzl wrote a book called what was it called? Der Alt Neuland, the old new land. And he at no point in that book, I should say differently, in that book, he describes other peoples living in the land of Israel, working together along with the Jews and building a utopia together, right? Kahana's dream of driving the Arabs out of Israel was not Herzl's dream.
No.
And was never part of mainstream Zionism. Zionism is about, that's our ancestor. I'm a Jew. My ancestors came from Judea. For 2,000 years, we prayed Bashana Haba'a Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And we want to have the right to return to our ancestral homeland that was stolen from us, that we were driven out of. That's to me what Zionism is. And in Israel's Declaration of Independence from 1948, which was read aloud by David Ben-Gurion, he invites the other people in the land of Israel, the Arabs, and other groups, to participate with us and build a state together. And look, that's happening to some extent. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but it is happening. Like I said, there are Christians, Muslims, and Druze, and who serve in the Israeli army, and those aren't Jewish people. They're all people who speak Arabic. They're from the Arab culture, and they are part of our country, and they're an important part of our country.
Yeah, no, thank you, Nehemia. That's there's many definitions of Zionism. So I should preface it's just a gripping way that I look at it, but
and that's fine. I'm not saying you have the right to look at it that way. I'm offering you my definition, which I think is consistent.
I think I think your definition is valid.
I mean, look, if in the land of Israel we had every one of the 20 million living Jews, and there were 30 million Arabs who wanted to live in peace with us, that'd be perfect. I don't have a problem with that.
But in the context of Orson Hyde's mission, right?
Yeah.
So then the second piece, I already talked about. Number one, what does Orson Hyde's mission reveal to us? That Ashkenazi Jews that were living in Europe are the target Jews to return to the land of Israel. But also all Jews. If Orson Hyde could have gone to Egypt or Yemen, then he would have invited those Jewish communities to return as well. The
irony is that Joseph Smith learned Hebrew from a Sephardic Jew, whose ancestors had come from Portugal. So they were aware. I don't know if they fully understood what Ashkenazim and Sephardim were, but
they would not have.
They probably didn't, but they had encountered at least some Sephardic Jews which was unusual. Let's say when I was growing up, most Jews in the United States were Ashkenazim. Today, that's no longer the case. I don't know the exact numbers, but today it's not unusual to encounter a Sephardic Jew. Most Jews in Israel today, at least 50, if not more, I believe more than 50%, are not of Ashkenazi descent. They are Jews who came from places like you said, like Yemen and Egypt and Iraq.
Yep.
And one of the places that's been attacked is Sderot.
Yep.
I have a podcast, Hebrew Voices, and I interviewed this woman in Sderot a few years back, and she was a Jewish refugee from Uzbekistan. She was one of what's called Bukharan Jews. Bukhara was an empire, a kingdom for centuries. Eventually, it became part of the Russian Empire, then the Soviet Union, and so it was absorbed. Her community was absorbed into that. But when Uzbekistan became independent from the Soviet Union in 1991, there was a pogrom, a massacre of all the Jews. Well, it wasn't of all the Jews, because the Jews then fled. As the Muslims started attacking the Jews fled. And so she came to Israel as a refugee in 1991. The government, she had nowhere to live, so the government put her in Sderot. Why'd they put her in Sderot? I don't know. It was probably, housing was probably very cheap there. And if the government's paying for it, they're not going to, they're going to do what they can afford. And she lived, this woman, in terror of rocket attacks, which she told me began in 2006, as soon as Israel pulled out. Within a short time of when Israel left Gaza, Israel had an occupation of Gaza, that's true, but it ended in 2006. And as soon as we pulled out of Gaza, they started firing rockets at us. And this woman, if she's still alive, I don't know if she is, I haven't spoken to her in years, but a few years ago when I spoke to her, she had been living for 15 or more years with regular rocket attacks. She told me the story of how there was a rocket attack and she was walking through the street and she was pregnant. And she started running for a bomb shelter. You have 15 seconds. Where I live, I have 90 seconds in Jerusalem. But in Sderot, you have 15 seconds, and she didn't make it. And she woke up in a hospital, and she said, "Where's my baby?" She had lost her pregnancy. And this is what people lived in Sderot for almost 20 years now. And so for this to happen after all that, wow. I mean, that's I can't imagine. I had somebody say to me, "So why do they even live there?" This woman didn't choose to live there. She wanted to live in Uzbekistan, where she was born, where her parents were born, where her grandparents were born, where her family probably lived for the last 1,000 years. Back when it was part of the Persian Empire, and Jews were participating on the Silk Road, which is where that area was, Bukhara. But she came as a refugee to Israel and is living now with this terror.
Yeah, let me just on that, let me push back. Let me fight. Let me fight Hamas's information warfare on that. They're gonna want to push out to you that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is about white settler colonialist imperialist from Europe and native brown Middle Eastern indigenous people. Well, guess what? The Jewish people are indigenous to the Middle East.
And come in every color, by the way.
And come in every single color.
I remember a few years ago, there was this wicked terrorist named Ahed Tamimi, who is this blonde-haired, blue-eyed monster who was hauled into court by the Israeli police, and she's literally being taken into court with one policewoman on one side and another policewoman on the other side. One of the policewomen was a dark brown, probably Moroccan Jew, and the other was a black Ethiopian Jew. And so here's this blonde hair, blue-eyed terrorist, and literally and it's interesting, you say that's Hamas's narrative. I don't think that's Hamas's narrative. I've never heard them say that. I hear that from American leftists. Hamas just says, Jews, we got to kill all the Jews. They hate the Sephardic brown Jews more than they hate the blonde hair, blue eye Ashkenazi Jews.
Yeah.
Because to them, the brown Sephardi Jews, those are the dhimis that they used to rule over, and dhimi is in Islam
Yeah.
a status of second-class citizen. And to them, these uppity dhimis who are now ruling over Arabs and Muslims, to them is I'll give you an analogy. It would be like if you went to somebody in the Ku Klux Klan and you said you're now going to be ruled by the descendant of a former slave, and that's how it just grates on the very essence and being of Hamas. To them, that they can't accept that they're not them, because they're not ruled by Israelis, but other Arabs, who the ones who are citizens of Israel, are ruled by Sephardic Jews. To them, that's an atrocity. Those people are, by Islamic law, second-class citizens and should not be ruling over Muslims. So I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that. I think maybe that's something they say for external consumption.
Sure.
That, the white colonialist Jews, to them, all Jews should be subjugated and murdered.
Yeah.
Some should be subjugated, others murdered. But they shouldn't be ruling over Muslims. That, look, that there. I used to think there was something that, whatever. I won't get into it. They definitely, there's definitely a deep anti-Semitism there. There's no question about it. And it's not limited to Ashkenazi Jews. Not at least from Hamas. Maybe from other Arabs and other Muslims that might be the case. But Hamas, no, they're an equal opportunity hater of all Jews.
Speaking of the narrative that is put out in the Western society, especially those from the left, the far extremists left. But you had mentioned to Jason that you had experiences as a student at BYU that you maybe want to rely about your interactions with a professor at BYU.
Yeah, it's right on this. It's right on this topic. So I was a senior at Brigham Young University, Provo. I had just returned. Recently had returned to Utah after living in Israel for a while. Just for transparency's sake, it's all in the burning book. I had dual citizenship with Israel for a time, and I did had to give up Israeli citizenship in order to commission as an officer in the U.S. military. But I had lived in Israel, lived in Greater Tel Aviv area, lived in Jerusalem, visited the country, have cousins that, some distant cousins that live in Israel. And so I come in, and and Steve knows the story. I believe in the Book of Mormon, and Steve, there's and viewers may know this story already. I'm a real believer in the Book of Mormon. I went on a mission for the church, and then I lived in Israel, and so I'm a very, at this point, very Orthodox Latter-day Saint, but also.
Did you make Aliyah, become an Israeli citizen, when you were already a Mormon?
I did, yes.
Wow.
That's a whole story contained in the burning book.
Okay.
And we could get into that story if you're curious, but I had lived amongst Israelis, and Palestinian Israelis too. I came to Israel on an internship at the Center for Jewish Arab Economic Development, where half of the staff was Jewish and half of the staff was Arab. And we got along with perfect, relations. And literally I came to Israel to work for an NGO that's whole job was raising money from wealthy Jewish donors in the United States and Canada to help Arab citizens of Israel economically with their businesses. Like I literally managed microloans to Arab citizens of Israel, their businesses. My birth as a Zionist was was helping Arabs living in Israel.
Wow.
Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. But I also, met people who suffered through terrorist attacks, and and stories of those who had survived rocket attacks from Hamas. So I was literally a trigger warning for me. Okay. And I come to Brigham Young University, and my senior year, I take the political science Palestinian-Israeli conflict course. The professor trained at the University of Chicago, very, very elite, intellectually advanced, right? Well, I can talk that, so, but I was still an undergraduate, so I didn't have all the academic training that I do now, but the narrative that she pushed was typical to what we find on most American college campuses. It was very secular, not rooted in Latter-day Saint scripture or doctrine, or even the long-range history and archaeology of the land of Israel. But she tried to persuade the students that Zionism is a European settler colonial movement that came in and forcibly displaced the indigenous native population, stole the land by using the tools of Western imperialism, and that the Palestinian refugees and displaced persons feel that that the entire land is their indigenous homeland that was stolen from them, much in the South Africa model, right? And comparing it, and even some validity to that. But this is 2009, so it's only a couple years since Hamas has taken control of Gaza, and there was this powerful moment where the professor explains the Palestinian cause and why Hamas is firing rockets on Israeli civilian towns, supermarkets, kindergartens. And right, because their narrative is they're trying to terrorize Jews to leave so that they can reclaim their land and sovereignty over their land, because it was stolen from them. And she asked for a raise of hands from students in my class. We had 40 students approximately, whether they believe, now that they've learned the facts, that Hamas rocket attacks are justified. And almost the entire class raised their hands.
Wow.
I stood up from my chair, put my hands on the desk, and I just stood up like George Costanza style. And I said, I am disgusted with each and every one of you who has raised your hands. You are supporting terrorism. And I sat down.
Wow.
And then the students didn't know what to do. I mean, Latter-day Saints are quite polite people. So they weren't sure what to do with this angry Jew, right? In their midst. But I was only full of emotion because I didn't have, academic or intellectual tools to challenge that narrative. But the fact of the matter is, right, it was opposed to Latter-day Saint doctrine, because the prophet Joseph Smith, the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sent one of his apostles to Jerusalem to dedicate the land of Israel, the whole land. And that it's there's not necessarily any what the borders should be. That's not part of the doctrine, but that the Jewish exiles should begin to return to their land and have a sovereign government And that's the language Orson Hyde uses is a distinct nation and government. You can find it in the Orson Hyde prayer. It's talking about
Can I read
a
that
Jewish
part of the
state.
prayer?
Sure.
Well, I don't know if it's that part of the prayer, but I was telling Stephen how I learned about this prayer. Years ago, I was on a hike, and I was hiking around Jerusalem, and I come across this thing that says Hyde Park. I'm like, Hyde Park? That's a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, and that's named after a place in London. Is there one here too? And I investigate, and I find out, no, it's something to do with Mormons. And there's this Orson Hyde who came and prayed in Jerusalem in 1841. Let me read it's a long prayer. I'm going to read just part of it. He says, "Now, O Lord, thy servant has been obedient to the heavenly vision, which thou gavest him in his native land. And under the shadow of thine outstretched arm, he has safely arrived in this place to dedicate and consecrate this land unto thee for the gathering together of Judah's scattered remnants, according to the predictions of the holy prophets, for the building up of Jerusalem again." So he definitely is praying there for the ingathering. I mean, look, and that's clear in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament that there'll be an ingathering of the exiles, and a restoration of Jerusalem. Now, for the parts of the audience who aren't Mormons and could care less what Orson Hyde prayed, and maybe they don't even believe in the Hebrew Bible. So just by international law, the places that were attacked are not disputed territory, right? There are parts of Israel which are disputed territory, the so-called West Bank, what Jews call Judea and Samaria. They're disputed territory in the way that Western Sahara is disputed, the way that other certain regions of the world are disputed. That doesn't apply to Kibbutz Be'eri or Sderot. Those are sovereign Israeli territory recognized by international law that were invaded by a foreign government.
Yep.
Which happens to be a terrorist government, but it is a foreign government.
Yeah.
There's no justification for that. I don't understand how a professor in a respectable university could say it's okay to fire rockets on another country because the people in the other country want to take back that country. That I mean, look, that's happens all over the world, right? You have you had the people in who were they? The Serbs, who were firing rockets on Sarajevo, and the whole world said this is wrong, it's evil. Well, it wasn't rockets, sorry, it was artillery. They said you're indiscriminately firing artillery on innocent civilians. It's wrong, it's evil. And why did the Serbs do that? Well, we don't have the military capacity to take Sarajevo, so we're just going to terrorize the people until they surrender. Yeah, we understand why you're doing it. You're indiscriminately firing at civilians with the intention of killing civilians.
Yep.
That's evil. That's a war crime.
Yeah, it's a war crime. It's terrorism and a war crime. And yeah,
I mean,
there was a whole class full of Latter-day Saints that were manipulated to support that.
So just real quick, does this pro-Hamas professor still teach at Brigham Young University? And do you know if things like this are still being taught at BYU?
Well, I haven't been there.
Let's just so the understands. The university, Brigham Young University, is owned and operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's not a Mormon affiliated church. It is a church school, and its mission is to fulfill part of their mission is to follow their prophets, to their commission. The glory of God is intelligence, the important role that education plays in the Latter-day Saint tradition, but also its role in helping the gathering of the Jewish people. And what also I pointed out, and I want you to talk about what's going on at BYU, but also I think what's so fascinating, and I brought this up to Nehemia yesterday, was that President Roosevelt was a rabid anti-Semite, but the person that took his place was Harry Truman. And Harry Truman was from a place called Independence, Missouri, which is another place of Zion, if you will, within the context of the Restoration. I don't know necessarily if that's a coincidence, But either way, Jason, speak to those two things.
Yeah. So so Steve, this professor is emeritus now.
Okay.
Retired. I don't know whether she's teaching courses or not. I don't know. I oppose her worldview, and her worldview is on this issue is against Latter-day Saint doctrine. I speak for myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So let's make that clear. But I have not been at Brigham Young University Provo inside the system since 2010. So I cannot speak to what is being taught. I do feel better about some of the professors that are there now, that are teaching this course. I'm friends with the new professor who's teaching this course, and I like him, and I support how he's teaching the course now. However, there is ambiguity. So I'm being clear, right? There is ambiguity. Does our church doctrine support the state of Israel's right to exist, the state? So I would say the answer is yes. And that needs to be taught very clearly, especially now. It's going to cause campus convulsions, right? Now here's my logic that I have been, and I've said this to other Latter-day Saint scholars, and I'll say it again. Do we believe that the Jewish people, the Jewish exiles, should return to the land of Israel as part of the great restoration and the word of the prophets? Okay, what's your answer? Yes, I believe that the Jewish exiles need to return to the land of Israel. Okay, so how are you going to protect those returning exiles and help them to live in peace in the land that they've been covenanted by God? We have to protect them. How are you going to protect them? You need a state. Okay? So you have to have a Jewish state to protect the gathering, returning Jews. Okay? So having a Jewish state is church doctrine. Now, we can zoom out. There are Latter-day Saints who believe it's a crime for Jews to immigrate to the land of Israel, because there is this idea that every Jew that immigrates to the land of Israel displaces a native Palestinian. Well, guess what? That's false, because Jews are also native and indigenous to Israel. As Nehemia said, it was the Roman Empire that forcibly exiled the Jewish people from the land of Israel, and not even all of them. That's actually a Christian myth, that, oh, the Jews crucified Jesus, so the curse was they all got exiled. Well, it's not true. There's always been Jews living in the land of Israel. Now, there was a loss of Jewish sovereignty, but even after the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, in my view, there was still the Shimon Bar Kokhba, who reestablished Jewish sovereignty in the 2nd century CE. So
for 3.5 years.
For 3.5 years, but there it's a Christian myth of a total exile, and it's a Christian myth of no right to Jewish sovereignty. So Shimon Bar Kokhba established sovereignty without the return of Jesus. And if you want to go even deeper, I would argue that the Sinai covenant that God made with the Jewish people is not a monarchical covenant. Joshua leads the children of Israel into the land of Israel without a monarchy, right? This is some of the reasons why, there's anti-Zionist, ultra-Orthodox Jews. They say, oh, you can't have a Jewish state without a king. Well, I don't think that that's biblical. That's not a biblical idea. You can establish Jewish sovereignty, you can have a Jewish state without a king, because the collective Jewish people that through which God made a covenant at Mount Sinai, the collective Jewish people have the right to go in and establish a state or a polity, which is what they did. It was only later that you have Saul and David. So the Jewish monarchy, right, is not essential to having a state. In any case, we're Americans, dang it. Like, you can have sovereignty through democracy. So, so there is these weird, fringe Latter-day Saint ideas. Well, the Jews are there prematurely. No, they're not. Look at Orson Hyde's mission. He was praying for the return of the Jewish people immediately. And you don't need a monarchy. A democracy is fine to reestablish a state.
I want to point out to let's say people watching this who don't come from a LDS background or a Jewish background or a Christian background, or maybe they come from those backgrounds, but don't accept any of those ideas. No one is discussing what the legitimacy of Albania, and no one is discussing the legitimacy of, I don't know, Lesotho. What is the justification for discussing the legitimacy of Israel? You might not even like how the country was established, right? You might think it was horrible they established that way, but it exists. It's a member of the United Nations. It has treaties with some of its neighbors, neighbors that it was at war with in the past, Jordan and Egypt, and now other neighbors that maybe it wasn't at war with, but didn't have relations with. The United Arab Emirates and Morocco, even Sudan of all countries. It's, to me, people say, well, it's okay to criticize Israel. Sure, if you're criticizing other countries, and if you're criticizing all the bad countries in the world, you can include Israel. That's how I look at it, right? But if you're just singling out Israel, and you have nothing to say about Brunei, which is a dictatorship, and you have nothing to say about the concentration camps in China, where there's 80 million Muslims living under Chinese rule, and 1 million of them are in concentration camps, the Uyghurs, then shut up about Israel. I don't want to hear what you have to say about Israel. I think, let's be honest, it's anti-Semitism. People hate Jews, and they hate that there's Jewish sovereignty and independence. And look, anti-Semitism there was a famous Zionist in the 19th century, a Zionist thinker who was also a psychologist. I forget his name. And he
Leon
said,
Pinsker. Leon Pinsker.
It might have been Pinsker.
Okay.
I don't remember who it was. And he said that anti-Semitism is a mental illness.
Yeah.
We can give any kind of explanation for it, and but it's a mental illness, and it takes different forms. And at one time it was the Jews killed Jesus, or the Jews killed Muhammad, which is actually what they say. And all the prophets is the way they express it, right? In some Islamic circles. Or the Jews aren't pure Aryans, right? Or the Jews are pure white people, right? So it goes both ways, right? So they're neo-colonialists or colonialists, right? I mean, it takes different forms, but ultimately it's anti-Semitism. It can't be explained rationally because it's not rational. It's an irrational hatred. And maybe it does come from something prophetic and biblical, that God says in the Torah, that he says you're going to be an example to the nations.
Yeah.
If you do good, you'll be a good example. If you do bad, you'll be a bad example. It says you'll be a proverb and a byword, right? That's how it is. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
But the latest form of anti-Semitism is anti-Israel. I mean, yeah.
Well, this was, I think, a very compelling and informative conversation, and we've been going. We've had. I think this was really. I think this is a really healthy conversation we have. Before we wrap things up, do either one of you have any final words you'd like to say to the audience? Jason?
Well, you go first, Jason, and then I'll.
Yeah, I'll just say, I'm very grateful for President Biden's words yesterday. He has set the policy of the United States that we will stand with Israel, and that we're not going to tolerate any other countries taking advantage of Israel's vulnerability right now. So it's a very complicated situation. I also want to invite all Latter-day Saints, within the sound of my voice, to stand with Israel at this time. It is true to our doctrine. It is true to the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon tells us that we need to recover the Jewish people. Now, I'm not calling for any kind of proselytizing, but recovering the Jewish people means that we take some responsibility for their well-being, for their survival, and that's a commandment in the Book of Mormon, and we also have to be vigilant in the information warfare. I consider and I judge the boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS movement to be information warfare against the Jewish people everywhere. Also, Jews living here in the United States, of which in some ways I'm still part of that community. And we have to oppose that. Like Nehemia said, I mean, how many Baha'is are going to Iranian universities? Go and look it up. How many Baha'is are going to Iranian universities? Why is there only boycotting of Israeli universities, Jewish universities, right? And so there's an anti-Semitic kernel that as Latter-day Saints we need to reject, because the Book of Mormon commands us to reject anti-Semitism. And I'll leave it there.
I would just ask that everyone out there, whether you're LDS, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever your background is, whatever your faith is, that you pray for the people of Israel, and in particular for the captives. There have been something like maybe 100 people, maybe more, who have been kidnapped, taken as prisoners to Gaza. Please pray for them. And I'll just ask on a selfish note, my nephews have been called up into their units. I want to share a story that I'm trying not to cry. So I have two nephews who served in the Golani Brigade, which is a combat brigade, some elite combat soldiers. And one of them, they were both called up to their unit. But before they were called up, my sister went to her younger son and said, "You haven't been called up yet. Pack your things. I'm going to drive you to the airport. I'll pay for you to fly anywhere. And you just tell your unit you're overseas for a month on vacation. You can't come." And she was serious. He said, "Ima, mother, those people have no one to defend them. People like me are it. I can't go to another country. I can't go overseas. I've got to go to, if my unit calls me, I'm going to go. And I'm going to defend those people who live near the Gaza border. I'm going to defend our country and our people." So I ask people to pray for my nephews, who are, one of them is already deployed. The other was actually on vacation. He was on vacation in Italy, and he got a flight. He's flying back tomorrow to Israel so he can report to his unit. And he could have said, "I'm already in Italy. I'm on vacation. Sorry, can't come." But he's going too. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you. Thank you both. I know this really, really hits home for both of you. Jason, last night you were sending me messages you were getting from Israel, from people that you know and love, who've lost family.
Yep.
Terrible stories that have been relayed to me. And I'm also do have connections in the ultra Orthodox community. I have reached out to some of those people as well to hear what they're hearing as well. This is really important that we get this information out there to the people to let them know what's really going on in Israel. This really hits home for me too, because basically I grew up in a evangelical world in which I used to watch Pat Robertson on the 700 Club, and they would go out and do expeditions to Israel. And the church here every year goes and does expeditions to Israel to educate people and to celebrate Israel and celebrate the Jewish people, the homeland of the birthplace of the three great Abrahamic religions. I just want to wish all of you Godspeed, Shalom, and
Shalom.
we're praying. We
Shalom.
are praying for the people of Jerusalem. So
Shalom.
thank you so much, both of you. Just a reminder,
you.
this is a kind of going to be like a joint production of
Mhm.
Mormon Book Reviews and Nehemiah's Wall. I'm sorry, sometimes I mispronounce your name when I get emotional. But and so this will be posted on both of our channels later today. And I just want you to bless Israel any way you can, people that are hearing and listening and watching this. And just remember, the most important thing is this: remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.